Hi everyone, my name is Bruce Pollack and I'm Deputy Chair of the Friends of the Australian Ballet. It's my great pleasure to be here today to have a conversation with a very special guest, Chris Yates. Today we are on stage at the Concourse Theatre in Chatswood, which has been lent to us to do this conversation, and it's really great of the people in Chatswood to give us this. This recording has been delayed slightly due to the restrictions of COVID, but we're thrilled that we're now able to do it and that Chris and I can be here together to do this interview. Let me introduce to you Chris Yates. Chris has more than 30 years in the performing arts industry, and his career has encompassed all facets of production, from live theatre, opera, ballet, and many other forms of theatre as well. Chris began his early career as a lighting designer, then stage manager with the Sydney Theatre Company, and then moved to Opera Australia, where he worked for 20 years, eventually as technical director of that company. And that encompassed a huge amount of roles. And working at the opera is very different to being at the ballet, and we'll explore that with you later. It was my privilege to work with Chris on the first Handel opera on Sydney Harbour, which was an amazing feat of engineering. Many people who go along to see it wouldn't understand the engineering behind that production, and it was Chris who basically came up with those ideas. And also we worked together on one of the biggest musical productions, which was Baz Luhrmann's Strictly Ballroom. Chris was appointed to the role of Director of Production with Director of Production and Planning at the Australian Ballet. So welcome, Chris Yates.
Thank you. Thank you,
It's thrilling to have you here and to be with you. Chris, can you give us an overview of the production department at the Australian Ballet? It is the equally biggest company in Australia. It is our flagship ballet company. It has a vast number of staff, normally all working in the premises in Melbourne. Can you tell us a bit about how big that organisation is and what's involved?
Well, look, it's not as big as you think, actually. It's actually a lean machine, the Australian Ballet, compared to a company like the Opera. Its permanent workforce in my area it really consists of a manufacturing team in wardrobe of about 14 people. We have a touring technical team of about 12 or 14 people. And then, of course, we have the production centre where our sets and costumes, etc., are stored with another half a dozen people or so. But I also oversee the artistic operations, which is another 6 or 7 administrative staff. Where it becomes large is that the scale of the work that we do is quite big. So when we get into a theatre, we might employ another 70 or 80 venue staff, including dressers, lighting, mechanist staff, etc. So it becomes a big operation when we get into the venue, but the permanent workforce for the ballet is quite lean when you compare. When you look at it in terms of the scale of the work that we put on stage.
And there is a lot.
There is a lot.
Under normal circumstances.
There isn't at the moment, I'm afraid, but under normal circumstances there is. And the fact that we tour more than most companies in Australia really adds another complexity to the operation. That's probably the most challenging aspect of our work that we do. Going from venue to venue, which all vary in size, large stages in Melbourne, small stages in Sydney, and then we've got our regional tour, of course, which goes to even smaller venues. But that's the complexity, I think, that we have to deal with.
And how many productions would you be working on at any one time, between those which are actually on stage and those in the planning stage?
Well, my role really works a long way ahead. We're looking at 2 years' time. So at the moment, it's a bit of a unique situation at the moment in that we've been working on 2021, still working on 2021. Normally that would be in the can now, and I'd be focused on 2022. But because of COVID, we've had to rethink that repertoire for 2021 many times. So we're looking at a full year of programs in 2021, and I'm also looking at 2022 now in terms of budgeting, scheduling, etc. So there's 5 new works in each of those years, so up to 10 productions.
And for an artistic director and you working together, they must be working well in advance if you're looking at commissioning new ballets altogether.
Absolutely. Yes, to get a new work
Without giving any secrets away, but yes.
I can't mention the repertoire, not yet announced, but in terms of getting a new work on stage, it's a minimum 2 years in advance.
Right. And that's a long time.
It is.
Yes.
It is. But there's a lot to factor in. There's a lot to consider. We have to engage the team. The artistic director has to approach them initially. Then we have to engage the creative teams, the directors, etc. They have to conceive the idea. Then they have to realise that idea in terms of models and drawings and renders. Then we have to cost it, and we have to make changes generally when it doesn't come in on budget, and then you get to the point of actually realising it, making the costumes, making the sets. Then it goes into rehearsal, and that process, and before we get it on stage, is about 2 years for a new work.
Yes, and so much happens even before the choreographer starts to work with the dancers.
Yes, from an operational point of view, yes, no, absolutely. There's, for quite a few elements, the work's complete. The costumes have been made, the sets have been built. I guess the last things that come into play are the lighting and the sound component, etc. But the music's been composed, the concept's been completed. It's just a matter of then working it in the studio into shape, really.
Right. Can you tell us about maybe one of the biggest productions that you've been involved in with the ballet? And getting it onto the stage?
The biggest production we've mounted to date is Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, the Chris Wilden production, designed by Bob Crowley, who's a renowned Broadway West End designer, Mary Poppins, Aladdin, etc. And it's very much on a musical format and musical in scale, multiple scenes, millions of dollars worth of scenery, elaborate costumes, a really huge work to put on. It had been presented at the Royal Opera House by the Royal Ballet before we took on the work, and it had also toured to Germany. But we decided that we were going to rebuild it from scratch, remake the costumes, rebuild the sets. And it was nearly a $4 million manufacturing budget for that. And it was a really enjoyable experience. We got on well with Bob Crowley, got on very well with the creative team, with Chris Wilden. We produced really high quality work. It was, I remember Bob Crowley telling me when I went to his studio in London, when we were in the early stages of mounting the production, the first thing he said to me was, "Never ever underestimate the scale of this work." And I thought, okay, that's good advice.
Yes.
Because as soon as we got into it and started building things and looking at it, we just realised how much there was. I remember the stage manager looking at the video at the time and at the end of the video said, "I feel sick." I literally feel sick. This is going to be huge. How am I going to call this show?
You mentioned that the other musicals he's done, and he's renowned for doing huge productions,
Yes.
of which I don't forget the Aladdin's Cave in Aladdin,
Yes.
and that whole transformation is just one of the great moments in the theatre.
Absolutely.
Is it very different for someone like him to design for ballet, forget the costumes for the moment, but to design sets for ballet as it is for a big musical?
It is, because very different considerations, particularly in costuming. The dancers have to be able to move, and
Yes.
and they need more space. than an opera or a play or a musical. So he needs to be able to present scenes that enable the choreography, really. But he's done a number of musicals, a number of ballets, with Chris Wilden.
Yes.
So he's adept at it.
Going back to Alice, in talking about that, and it was a question I was going to get to later on, but you've started to touch on it, the difference in the sizes of the stages, of which you mentioned start off with. With regret, the stage in Sydney is a little smaller than the exquisite stage in the Arts Centre in Melbourne. Is that a huge problem for you and
so.
for the production teams?
Very much so. Particularly now that we're co-producing internationally, we're aligning with international companies to present works, and most of the companies we align with have theatres the size of the Arts Centre in Melbourne, and the Opera House is the odd space out, really. It's a small stage. It's curved. The shell's curved, so when you go upstage, it gets narrower. It has a shallow grid, meaning not a lot of height. And we've got to make those sets, those productions fit into the co-producers theatre, into the Arts Centre and into the Opera House. So all of that has to be done prior to the build, working out how it goes into the different spaces. And with some productions it's particularly difficult. It was difficult with Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. We're co-producing a production with the Joffrey Ballet at the moment, which is a very complex set that all has to be reworked for Sydney.
Right. Do we know about that yet? Don't give away something if you're not allowed to. But
Well, we haven't launched the season.
you haven't announced that yet? Good.
No.
Everyone, we'll look forward to that announcement. Don't say another word, because we might both get into big trouble.
I won't give it away.
Something that people love to know about in talking to people who are involved in and responsible for the technical side of the theatre. Do things often go wrong on stages in a technical sense? I don't mean
Not so much
dancers
with
falling
ballet.
over, right?
Yeah, they do. I think more in the past than they do than these days. But there are often, malfunctions that can be a little hair-raising, particularly if you're working with automated scenery or something that you don't have manual control over.
Right.
That can sometimes cause a few issues.
It's a curse of the way society is going. We're becoming more and more technical and reliant on technical things rather than the 1800s, where if a revolve was going to go around, there'd be people winding it.
That's right. And watching for the stop position
Yes.
rather than just pressing a button and wait, hoping that the automated queuing stops it at the right time.
Or turning up the amount of gas that was going through the gas pipe.
Yes, or running out of gas.
Or running out of gas altogether.
Yeah. But yeah, that's the thing about live theatre. There's always something that can happen,
But that's also one of the most exciting things about live theatre.
It is. It's great. Whether it be a dancer missing an entrance or some scenery coming in at the wrong time or not going out, as we've had at the Opera House, with the house curtain not being able to go out to start the show and losing a performance, those sorts of things.
You didn't get it out at all?
No.
Whoa!
No, that wasn't a good night.
No, that would have not been a good night.
Not
It's
at
also
all.
a costly one because you'd have to refund or move or...
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, it wasn't the best night I've had in the theatre, that's for sure.
Would that be one of the worst?
That was the most disappointing, I think. I remember I did a production for Dalio with the opera, which was an enormous set. It was a bit like the Olympic flame moment, I think, where there was an underworld, a prison camp. It was the underworld, and there was other scenes set above that. And the way we transitioned from the underworld and out of it was a huge. Basically, the stage floor was on a big ramp, and a hydraulic ramp, and it lifted up, and then it would come down, and it was about 12 metres high by about 8 metres wide, and it had a little trapdoor about the size of this table in the middle of it, and in one particular scene change, this floor would fall down, would lower, and the opera singer was standing on their mark in the position where this trapdoor, where the trapdoor was, the trapdoor would open, and she would, the floor would go straight past, and she'd be standing through the middle. And at one particular night, the trapdoor didn't open, or wasn't opening, as the floor was getting closer and closer.
About to kill a singer.
About to squash an opera singer, yeah. So we had to stop that at very last minute. That wasn't a great moment. But many things like that, pillars falling, the end of Don Giovanni, I remember there was a window behind the Don and two pillars that just sort of collapsed. The window slid out and the pillars collapsed, and he was standing in the middle. Yeah. And there was an evening where the pillars actually started falling on an angle. Luckily he was agile, and he got out of the way pretty quickly. So there were a couple of hairy moments. But
that is the excitement of live theatre.
It is. It is.
Very much the excitement of live theatre.
They're not things that, as a technical director or a production director, that you really want to see.
And with regard to regional touring, is it accepted well? Is it okay to do regional touring venues? And would the ballet like to be able to do more if the venues were there?
Yeah, look, we have a program that we've sort of stuck to over the years, really, for decades, which is a 6-week period in the middle of the year. We were very well received in the regional theatres. We kind of on a 3-year cycle where we try to get to as many states as we can over that 3-year period, and I think the format we've got now is good, and it's well received, and it's great fun. It's very different to the main stage, and it's its own little entity, really, I guess, in that it has different production team that tour with it, and it has its challenges because we're touring into town halls and venues that vary in size and aren't that well equipped, and the staff take on a lot on that tour.
The touring staff?
Our touring staff, yeah. But I think what we're doing now is a good, is a good footprint.
It's wonderful that the ballet does go out to the regions, and people who don't live in capital cities are able to have the quality of the ballet coming out to them.
Absolutely, and we've strengthened the. We've got more main stage dancers on tour now.
Right.
So it's a better representation. It's the Australian Ballet regional tour now, rather than it used to be called the Dancers Company.
Yes.
It was predominantly final year graduates from the ballet school, but we've now augmented that with more main stage dancers.
Right, so it's going out very much under the banner of the Australian Ballet. That's fantastic.
It's great.
And there's been so much put in a streaming sense by the ballet and the Friends of the Australian Ballet, which has been fantastic, because people have been able to stay in contact with the organisation through other means, even if we couldn't get into a theatre to see them live.
No, absolutely, and that's an area we're focusing on as well into the future, and from a permanent, something that we'll look at ongoingly, I guess.
Right.
That digital reach.
And it must have been so hard for dancers to maintain a fitness without doing class with the rest of the company.
Oh, look, it's tough. It's tough on the dancers. They need space. And we had just started to get them back into the studios prior to the second wave in Melbourne, and I think we were up to 10 at a time in each studio. and the difference from having to do their class at home by Zoom or Teams to being in the studio was huge. They need the space. So, and you know, there are dancers living in small apartments, and a lot of them don't have the space. So it's tough on them. We're hoping to get them back in from next week. Again, gradually, 2 at a time, 4 at a time, 10, building up to full company sort of mid-November.
Right. For a return to the stage when we're yet to hear.
Yeah, look,
yes.
we're trying to get back,
Yes.
you know, around March, late February, March next year. It'll all depend, of course, on how well the case numbers go, you know, and what happens in Victoria.
Because you can't really start back on stage until you can across the whole, at least Sydney and Melbourne, I would have thought.
Yes, well, the dancers need to get in condition first. That'll take 6 weeks. Then they need to start learning the repertoire. We've cancelled everything this year, as you know. So we're just hoping that early next year we can start performing.
We very much look forward to it.
So do I.
I'm sure you do. Chris, you were at the opera for a long time, and there were many productions that you supervised there, but there's a huge difference between the opera and the ballet and the way they work. Can you describe that for us?
Yeah, well, the major difference is that the opera works in repertory mode, which means that they're doing a different opera every night, and they have to do that because singers generally can't perform consecutive evenings. They have to rest their voices. So it means that the schedule entails rehearsing in the an opera in the morning on stage, changing over in the afternoon, and setting up for a different opera to perform that night, and then when that's finished we have to strike that, change over and set up the rehearsal again the next morning. So it's a continual stretch of rehearsals in the morning, changing over, performing in the evening until you've got your season up and running. So very long days, lots of crews, doubled up teams basically, working from 7 a.m. until 1 or 2 in the morning. Whereas the ballet is what we call stagione, and meaning that we get in one production at a time. We'll set up, open a ballet, do a run of performances, and then at the end of that, strike it and set up the next ballet. So that's the major difference between opera and ballet, or the way we work.
If I'm right, it means the stage is available during the day as well, which is where we're at times so lucky to be able to witness class on stage. So so the stage is used every day for various different things.
That's right. In the ballet, the stage is cleared at night, and the dancers use it during the day for class and also to learn new repertoire.
Right.
Yeah.
And is it difficult to learn new repertoire on the stage of a ballet that's already on?
Well, the stage is cleared to a point where it's just an open space. So the sets are moved off, all the scenery's flown up and out of the way to create a space for the dancers.
So it's like a big rehearsal room?
It becomes a big rehearsal room.
Right, okay. I just want to talk COVID-19 for a second, in that, and hopefully we won't be talking COVID-19 for much longer, but a friend of mine has recently taken over as artistic director of an international orchestra, and this was quite a few months ago. He was put in the position for planning the repertoire for next year, but was told because of COVID, social distancing might be applying, so therefore to program with regard to social distancing, which basically meant he could only have about a third of the orchestra on stage at any one time. And that brought the repertoire down enormously to chamber works. What would happen? Would it be possible for the ballet to continue if social distancing was in ahead? I mean, I presume pas de deux would be difficult.
Well, we have to assume that the dancers can partner.
Right.
First up, so we can't perform if they're not allowed to partner. which they're not at the moment. So we need to get to that point first, and then learn the repertoire and get into the venue. But we've worked on a number of different models with social distancing in mind, and there's many ways to go about it. Of course, the business case doesn't really stack up when we can only fit 350 people in a 1,500 seat theatre due to social distancing. So we need to get to a capacity of around about 50%. But things that we've looked at, and it's very difficult for the orchestra, especially the woodwind sections, their distancing criteria at the moment means that to put a normal orchestra in the opera house would basically move halfway into the auditorium with the social distancing. So you either have to reorchestrate with works that are out of copyright and do select works that are like a chamber work or with minimal musicians, or we're looking at putting sections of the orchestra into different rooms and piping that back into the auditorium from a sound perspective. So it's complex and it's expensive. We need to find the space to put the different sections in. So there'll be a certain number, I think it's about 24 players can fit into the Opera House pit at the moment with current restrictions.
Right.
And the other 20 we have to find somewhere else for them. Otherwise we have to choose repertoire that has a very small orchestra, or we'd have to play to tape.
That's what I was just going to mention.
Which is a dirty word if you're talking to Nicolette, so we don't want to play to tape.
And to the
Obviously.
unions, I would have thought.
Yes, no, obviously we want to do everything live.
Yes.
As much as we can. But that, I guess, would be the last fallback. Would have to play to tape. But not everything has a recording, and so that limits your repertoire as well. So big challenges for the orchestra. And then there's also challenging from a staging perspective. And from a dancer perspective, you either have to choose to double cast to mitigate risk if someone gets infected, and likewise with the crew, or go into very serious protocols like the sports, the professional sports teams have done with testing, regular testing, creating bubbles, etc. But they're very, very expensive. It's too expensive for us. They have a bigger pool of money than we do to do that. So we can't create bubbles, and we can't do regular testing, and we have to look at protocols like hygiene protocols and just general, as we're all doing, distance where you can, wear masks where you can, the crew would be wearing masks, etc. And we've looked at a number of scenarios. When we thought we might be able, before the second wave, we were planning a season at the Opera House in November, December, and it was a model that looked at, we were looking at doing 3 performances a day with a smaller touring company. So it'd be a triple bill at night and 2 story time children's ballets during the day, 45-minute pieces, 2 performances during the day, and then changing over into the triple bill at night. And that made the business model, the business case work. We were assuming an audience of about 450 a performance over the day. It adds up to your regular 1,500. But unfortunately, the second wave hit, and we weren't able to test that one.
Couldn't even go ahead with that.
No, so that was a shame, because that would have been, I think, an interesting foray into post-COVID, I think.
Right. And it's been a very strange year for another reason, in that, of course, it was David McAllister's last year, or this is his last year, which has been very sad that we've not been able to witness the program that he had planned as his final program. And the transition to David Hallberg, who's coming in. Are you already working with him on schedules? How has that transition come about? What are you doing there?
Look, working very closely with David at the moment. Interestingly, look, it's a very tough beginning for someone that's never been an artistic director before to come in under these circumstances. But in a strange way, it's enabled him to, because we've had to change the 2021 repertoire so much. It's enabled him to get a bigger stamp on some of his works or his input into the season. So while it's been very frustrating and difficult for both Davids and David Hallberg trying to create a new program, it's enabled him to put things into the repertoire that he may not have if we weren't under this environment. It would have been a set program that he would have had to live with, but we've had to change. So, look, David's working hard on 2022. He's been working very hard on 2021, and we're still working on 2021, but hopefully within a couple of weeks, a few weeks, that'll all have been finalised. Oh, it's been terrific.
Yeah.
And they're very exciting, and some exciting things in the pipeline as well. And look, I think David's going to be he's going to be wonderful. I think it'll be a great transition. It'll be a different looking company.
Yes.
And it's exciting for me. I'm enjoying the process so far.
And so what's a normal working day for you?
Oh, well, at the moment it's strange because
Well, obviously because of COVID, but yeah.
Yeah, we're just working on different scenarios, modelling different scenarios that are changing all the time, and it's very much just working in the future. And of course, most of us are working from home, but it's trying to come up with repertoire that we think is going to stick, that we can do, and try and get that finalised. But it's been changing constantly. So working on things and then getting cancelled and setting up different scenarios and modelling and changing. But it's been busy actually.
Thanks so far, Chris. In advance of today, some people knew that this was going on, so they sent in some questions and asked me to follow them up with you.
Okay.
So what is the future of ballets in a physical sense? I mean, so much is happening virtually now. Are we going to see that that's the way ballets are going to go? Will sets disappear and it's all going to be electronic, or...?
Well, there's been a lot of moves into that area. I don't think they'll ever disappear completely. I think over the last decade almost, with the integration of the audiovisual component has become a lot stronger, and it's evident in a number of our ballets now, the use of projections and digital content. The opera, of course, is going into its digital seasons in a big way. They've invested a lot of money in that area. It'll be interesting to see how that progresses. The digital component is interesting, and it can be very effective, but it's also quite time-consuming, and it's difficult to rehearse on stage. It takes time. It's great for dance in that it allows a lot of space for the dancers, and it'll always be incorporated, and it may take a higher profile in future, but I think we'll always have some physical elements.
I would hope so.
In staging.
I would hope so.
Yeah.
It's nice to have something else there other than the dancers.
Yeah, and it's certainly in costuming. While the fabrics are much different these days and more interesting, that component will always, have a high element of design.
Right. Post-COVID, what's your normal day going to be?
Well, my days now, as we've discussed, are working much more in the future, and much more to do with planning, and less to do with the time on stage, putting it in. I have a technical director, John Buswell, who now oversees the technical team and liaises with designers in terms of getting the production into the theatre and on stage. So he certainly takes over once the production's in the venue.
Yeah.
He'll then be the key player in putting that production on stage from a production perspective. Our head of costume, of course, oversees the manufacture, and we have heads of department in each other areas. So I'm now more thinking about what's coming up in the next 2 years or so, and collating the information to get that production on stage.
Right. And what are you looking forward to most post-COVID?
Certainly looking to just performing again, you know, to actually getting into the theatre and getting the productions up and on, and watching the dancers perform to an audience.
Yes. In mounting new productions, can you talk about the pool of talent that we have in Australia and the quality of that compared with what is coming internationally?
Absolutely.
Not necessarily just in the dancers, but in production as a whole?
Yeah, look, having entered into these co-productions with a number of different companies, I'm really proud to say that the quality of the work and the standard in Australia is as good, if not better, than most. I guess a sense of pride from the teams, but particularly at the ballet, they're all keen in their own areas to produce the best quality. The costume department make wonderful, high quality costumes. The technical team insist on doing technical rehearsals and making the production work and it being slick by the time we open. And whereas the pressure, and particularly in the American companies, they're under a lot of pressure to get up and open very quickly. So they're sacrificing a lot of that technical time to finesse the work.
Did they really?
Yeah. ABT, for example, there's a lot of pressure when they're at the Lincoln Centre at the Met stage to get as many shows up and running as they can because they need the box office. So their schedules are very, very tight. Whereas we allocate a little bit more time, and I think the product, it shows.
It shows on stage.
Yeah. It's the same in the musical world as well. I think that what the Australian companies put on in Australia are as good as anywhere in the world.
Our skills and resources are just as good here as so many other countries.
Yeah, a lot less resources, unfortunately. The industry is much smaller here, but the quality's spot on.
And of your job, what do you enjoy the most?
For me, I like to see it realised. You know, when you've been working on something for 2 years, on various components, various areas, I just love opening night.
Not just for the fun of it, but to actually see it there.
Just to see it all realised. You know, it's all been an idea or a vision or a drawing or a model piece, and then to see the work that goes into getting that production on stage. Once it's there and it's on and open, that's great.
It must be very joyous for you, and for the whole team.
Most often it is, more often than not. Generally is, yeah, that's great.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
for your time with
Pleasure.
us. We wish Chris and the Australian Ballet an enormous success in the years to come, and we look forward so much to announcements of what will be coming up in 2021. We're sure it's going to be as thrilling as we've always had from the Australian Ballet. We thank the ballet and Chris for your dedication in being able to move forward in these incredibly difficult times, and for everything that the ballet has done to maintain our interest in ballet over this very, very difficult period. It's let alone being difficult for the dancers, but for the whole production team and everybody to have been in the situation that they have been, and for the whole theatre industry for the last 9 months that we've suffered what's gone on. We thank the Concourse for hosting us here today. It's been really fantastic, and it's been great that we could actually sit here and with social distancing, do this face to face, even though we haven't been able to do it in front of a huge audience. We encourage everybody to maintain an interest in the Friends of the Australian Ballet website and the Australian Ballet's website to see what's coming up with activities and virtual activities. Both organisations are really packing them in and making sure that there is plenty of content for those ballet lovers to enjoy in this time. There will be more fascinating, well, I hope you found this fascinating, and there will be more fascinating interviews that we will be streaming for you. Please keep up to date with them by going to the Friends of the Australian Ballet website, www.fab.org.au, or follow the Friends of the Australian Ballet on Facebook, Instagram and LinkedIn. Best wishes to everyone. Thank you, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you. Thank you. Hope that was okay.